This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201. Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
Today is the third in a three-part series on the book of Nehemiah. And this arguably is my favorite verse in the whole book of Nehemiah. We began the first session talking about Nehemiah saying, I was the cupbearer to the king. In the second portion of this series, I talked about last week Nehemiah assessing the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats to rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And he did that by taking what looked like a weakness and then transforming that into a strength. And what was the weakness? That they were decentralized into a group of families. But Nehemiah figured out that if every family could just build and rebuild and repair the wall behind their houses, that you get enough people rebuilding their little part of the wall, eventually the wall is going to be complete. But today, I want to talk about my favorite verse in the book of Nehemiah. It's the 6th chapter, the 3rd verse, where the enemies of the Jews, the enemies of Nehemiah, have surrounded him. They're sending ambassadors, emissaries to him, and they're asking him effectively to stop rebuilding the walls. And let me paint this picture for you. Nehemiah is on the wall. He has all these other families on the walls. And the Bible tells us this, that the people who are repairing the walls have the instruments of repair in one hand, and they have weapons in the other. And then there's a whole other group of people who are not rebuilding the walls. They are the protectors. They are the protectors of the artisans, the families who are repairing the walls. And Nehemiah has figured out how to encourage everybody to just do their little part. And when I was a boy, my father had started the process of building a new church for our church in Detroit. And it really bothered my dad that it seemed like an insurmountable debt. It was $1,600,000. And my father, it was really, really wearing heavy on him. And I like to tease my dad. I said, Dad, you had the vision for the church. You built the church, but I paid for it. I became his assistant minister, then the associate minister, then I became the pastor. And eventually, we paid off the church. But one of the verses that my dad used to preach about all the time, and for those of you who've known me as a minister, you probably haven't heard me preach this text because I've stayed away from it. And the reason why I've stayed away from it is it makes me think about my father. And I think about my father, trying to encourage the members of the church to pay their tithes and their offerings. And my father's signature verse was chapter 6, verse 3, where Nehemiah is he's beset by these adversaries. and they really want to talk him down from the wall. They don't have the nerve to shoot him with an arrow. They don't have the nerve to climb the wall and cut him down with a sword. They try to talk him down. And I'm wondering, those of you who've been with me through this three-part series, we don't read about what happened to the armed guard, the Persian army, and the Persian cavalry that accompanied Nehemiah home back to Jerusalem. We really don't read about them. And I'm wondering, was the Persian guard, the Persian armed forces, still with Nehemiah? And was maybe that the reason why these adversaries of Nehemiah and the Jews tried to talk him down from the wall? And why is it they go after Nehemiah? They could have gone after anybody. But like modern day criminals, they realized that Nehemiah was the brains in the operation. They realized that Nehemiah was the one who had motivated everybody else to come together, to transform their weaknesses into their strengths, and to rebuild and to repair the gaps in the wall. And so they tried to talk him down, and they used cunning language. Come, let us reason together. Come, let's get away from this wall, all this dust. Let's go out into the fields and let's talk with one another. And the response that Nehemiah gives to these people who try to talk him out of rebuilding the wall is classic. He says, no, I cannot come down because I'm doing a great work. I'm doing a great work on this wall, and I can't come down. I don't have time for you. I don't have time for your foolishness. I don't have time for your clever desire to trick me out of being at this wall. I'm going to stay right here until the Lord calls me home. And there's a lesson in this, and the lesson is focus. What Nehemiah is telling us and showing us is that he had a focus. And what is his focus? His focus was simple: rebuilding the wall. But you know, there are a lot of people in today's world who can't get ahead, can't do as much as God has really prepared them to do because they're not focused. They're too busy trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to go here, trying to go there. And many of us would be much, much better off if we simply could just stay put and dig our heels. Several weeks ago, I shared a little story about my mother. My mother was working on a PhD when I was going through middle school and high school. And at night, when she would do her doctoral preparation, she put my brother Emory on the closed-in back porch. She put me in the dining room, and she was like the ringmaster sitting between us. And Emory was a diligent student. He just plowed right ahead. But I was a daydreamer. When I was young, I daydreamed about the football game I was going to play on Saturdays during the day. When I got a little older, I daydreamed about the football games on Friday night in high school, ninth grade, before I went to Cass Tech. When I went to Cass Tech, I just switched over to music and football was out. But when I was daydreaming about football, and then after football, my daydreams turned to music. I played in an R&B band. And then I was daydreaming about Friday night and Saturday night. What songs were we going to play? In what order were we going to play them? How were we going to play them? And I just had a ball daydreaming. And my mother would catch me daydreaming, and she'd shout at me. She'd put her books down, and she'd say, "Focus, black man, focus. The black man's problem is a lack of focus." And I would think it was the funniest thing in the world. I said, why didn't she talk to my two brothers like that? My sister was developmentally disabled, so she couldn't pick on her. But I was the one she picked on. Focus, black man, focus. But my mother saw something that I didn't realize. And one of the things I didn't realize back then, I was a daydreamer. As I've gotten older, I've realized that I am an audiophile. And what I mean by being an audiophile is that I'm severely impacted by sound, any kind of sound, especially music. But it could be other sounds as well. And so when I prepared this sermon, I prepared in silence. When I got ready to preach this sermon, I get ready in silence because I know that I'm addicted to sound. But it took me years to realize this. And, you know, my wife doesn't understand it. She can't go to bed at night without having the TV on. And after 47 years of marital compromise, you know, I let her get away with that till I think her eyes are closed. Then I sneak around with the remote and I try to turn off the channel and the sound. And then she wakes up and she says, "Why'd you do that?" And, you know, "Why are you trying to rob me of my show?" And I say, "Look, I'm addicted to sound." But what I remember from my mother was focus, black man, focus. And I'm about out of time right now, but I want you to think about this, Nehemiah chapter 6. We're going to take a quick break. And when I come back, I'm going to talk for the third time, and I think the last time, with Dr. Linda Hotchkiss. I hope this isn't the last time I talk with you. But we're going to talk about this from a psychological standpoint and emotional wellness. What does it say about Nehemiah to stay on that wall and say, "I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down"? Stick around and we'll be right back.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because of course you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this platform, this new platform, will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world, and Lord knows we need it.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
Today, we're talking about the part 3 of a series of messages I've given on the book of Nehemiah. And on one of my favorite verses, chapter 6, verse 3, where Nehemiah says to his adversaries, "I cannot come down from the wall because I'm doing a great work." And with me today is Dr. Linda Hotchkiss, a local psychiatrist in the Detroit area. And I've asked her to join me to give some wisdom, some psychological insight as to what's really going on in the mind of Nehemiah. Dr. Hotchkiss, thank you for being with me today. So, you heard me say a few words about Nehemiah and his refusal to be talked into coming down from the wall that he's repairing. What are your first thoughts about this?
Two thoughts. One has to do with courage, and the other has to do with commitment. I think we see in Nehemiah the courage to commit to building the wall, but also the courage to not let fear overwhelm him from these people who he knows they don't want him to do this. He knows that they are trying to figure out a way to undermine what he's doing. I think he really knows that. And you mentioned before, does he have the cavalry in the back pocket, or does he have his own inner strength? I think it's probably some of both. I think he has the courage to go through with this no matter what it takes. He has the commitment in the sense that he has decided on a course of action. He's going to see it through. He wants to see it through. He wants to have that feeling of success and of safety for his whole family being all of the Israelites. So I think in terms of courage and commitment, there's a little bit of a part of him, I think, that maybe a little bit of hero in there. People like to feel like they're a hero, and that's okay, because he is.
Mm-hmm. I'm listening to you talk and thinking about, you're mentioning the courage to maintain his focus. What about the wisdom that Nehemiah has to be able to perceive danger? Sometimes a person doesn't realize that not everybody is on your side. And from a psychological wellness standpoint, where does wisdom fit into that? Or is that just good luck?
It's some of both. It's some of both. I think when you've been, when you have faced a lot of adversity, which Nehemiah and all of the Israelites have faced, I think it makes you a little suspicious. And there's nothing wrong with being a little bit suspicious in terms of if someone is saying to you who you know is an enemy, if they're suddenly saying, oh, let's sit down and talk, I think it's okay to be a little bit questioning of that. And maybe that's the wisdom that he's gained. I need to be questioning of some things. And I think he also has some wisdom with regard to, again, he's said to the people who are building the wall with him, we're going to build, but we're also going to have some weapons here also. I think that's wisdom too. I think he's saying, wisdom is in part trying to think through all of the possible consequences and making a choice depending on what you think are all of the possible consequences. And of course, you want the best consequence to occur. So I think we see his wisdom. Okay, what if I went out there and what if it is a trick? I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to stay here and do what I want to do because I think this is the right thing to do.
Dr. Hotchkiss, I'm glad you reminded me about what Nehemiah is going through. And the thought just went through my mind that Nehemiah is challenging the residents of Jerusalem to rebuild the walls, but also to protect themselves at the same time. And it got me thinking about the, post-traumatic stress disorders that warriors, the members of the military experience when they come home, where they are, focused in a war-like mindset, kill or be killed. But then you step out of that and you come back home to civilian life. And Nehemiah seems to be blending both. He has the warrior side of the same person. People, that are helping to rebuild a wall are rebuilding on one hand, but they are prepared to fight on the other. And I'm just curious, as a psychiatrist, what kind of advice do you give to people who've been in a war zone, people who've seen terrible things, experienced terrible things, but then to step back out into normalcy? What kind of advice do you render to people like that?
It's very, very difficult to make that transition. So, number one, for the person themselves and the people around them to acknowledge that it is very difficult, not only because of what you remember in terms of what you saw, but there are actual physiological changes that occur when you are exposed to that kind of thing in terms of any kind of trauma, but especially in war. There are actually physiological changes that occur in your brain that you continue to bring with you, and it's important for people to realize that if a person seems like they're easily triggered or they're depressed, you know, it's not because they want to be that way. It's because it's difficult because of what they've experienced. I do think acknowledging that this is an important issue that a person has to deal with, that their family has to deal with, is important. Getting help, talking to a specialist in PTSD, I think is very helpful. Part of what has happened is whatever situation they were in has become linked to an intense emotional reaction. And we now know that there are actually some medications and therapies that can help the person become desensitized so that that trigger situation doesn't stimulate that same intense emotional fight or flight response. It's very important to acknowledge it's real, and it's very important, though, for people to seek help because they can.
Dr. Hotchkiss, great points. You've been with me for the last 3 weeks. We're wrapping up this 3-part series on the book of Nehemiah. And I'm just curious, looking over your shoulder, going backwards these past 3 weeks, what are some of the signature moments that you've noticed in the life of Nehemiah?
The first one is the transition that he made and the lesson that teaches us about being able to transform oneself. He transitioned from being a member of a conquered class, a servant, a trusted servant, and then a trusted lieutenant. And he was able to use that to do something else that was even a greater good, a greater help for the Israelites rebuilding the wall, getting the king to cooperate with that. So being able to transform himself, I think, is one lesson. Second lesson, I think, is his strategic vision. He was able to take a look at the human resources also and say, here's a way we might be able to put this together to be successful. And then the third lesson is focus and courage and commitment. He decided, I can do this, maybe a little bit of hero, but that's okay because he's used prayer and God to help him feel strong enough to do that. So transformation, his strategic approach, and then his commitment, those have been the lessons for me.
I like how you've analyzed the book of Nehemiah. We only have a couple of minutes left, but for the person who's looking at the program today, who's maybe struggling to find emotional wellness, inner sanctum, peace, what suggestions would you give them?
Again, we've learned that social support, social connectedness, whether it's with your friends, family, positive friends or family, or church members, social connectedness really, really makes a difference. So reach out and ask for help. when you need help. Don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed if you need help. Many people are still worried about the stigma of mental illness. Reach out for help when you need it.
I want you to leave a professional number, telephone number, where people can contact you if you want them to call the church. We'll be happy to refer your number. But you've been such a help. It's been very inspiring to me to hear you and to have you here to share your nuggets of wisdom, not just on Nehemiah, but for the modern listener, the modern person who's searching, trying to find relevancy, trying to find meaning in life. We're about out of time, but thanks again. And down the road, I hope you'll accept an invitation to come back and join me on the show.
I'd love to. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And folks, thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate your help. And, I forgot, I've been so excited listening to Dr. Hotchkiss for the last 3 weeks. I've just overlooked making a financial appeal. But I want you to know that this is a new broadcast ministry, and I need your support. I want to thank those who are supporting this ministry. The first support I received was from Mobile, Alabama. I have people out in California, New York, now Chicago, who are sending a check. Look at the address on the screen right now, 4535 Chrysler Drive, and you can send a tax-deductible check in any amount, and I'll be happy to send you a complimentary copy of my first book entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. God bless, God keep you. I look forward to seeing you next week, and remember, I am praying for you.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because, of course, you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this new platform will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world.